September 2nd, 1939. The world was still holding its breath. Only one day had passed since Adolf Hitler unleashed his army against Poland, igniting the spark that would soon engulf the entire planet. Across Europe, the air was thick with fear. Britain and France had not yet declared war, but their patience was breaking. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler believed he had done the unthinkable. He had gambled, once again, that the world would let him have his way. Inside the Reich Chancellery, the atmosphere was electric. Maps covered the walls. Red arrows pushed deep into Polish territory. And yet, despite the chaos outside, Hitler seemed strangely calm. He had done this before: Austria, Czechoslovakia, the Rhineland. Each time the world protested and did nothing. Why would this time be any different? At dawn, Hitler's adjutant entered his office carrying the latest reports. The Polish front was collapsing in multiple sectors. German tanks, the panzer divisions, were moving at lightning speed. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies, bombing railways, bridges, and columns of retreating troops. The report was optimistic. By all military standards, the invasion was going perfectly. Hitler smiled faintly. His voice was calm, almost cold. "The Polish army will not survive 10 days, he said. "And once Poland falls, the world will accept the new order." He was convinced that history would repeat itself, that Britain and France would protest, send diplomats, and then move on. But outside Germany, something was shifting. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain faced the British Parliament. The previous evening, Britain had sent an ultimatum to Berlin: withdraw your troops from Poland, or face war. The deadline had passed. No reply had come from Hitler. In Paris, the French government debated through the night. Memories of the Great War still haunted them. But the mood was changing. Honor demanded a response. And in Warsaw, Polish citizens huddled in basements as bombs exploded above. The invasion that Hitler had called a defensive measure was clearly a brutal act of aggression. At midday, Hitler met with his generals, Keitel, Brauchitsch, and Halder. They brought him battlefield maps. Poland was being crushed, but resistance was fierce. In some sectors, Polish cavalry units launched desperate charges against German armor. Halder warned, "The Poles are fighting harder than expected. We may need more time to encircle Warsaw." Hitler frowned, pacing slowly across the marble floor. "Time," he repeated. "We have no time. The world must see how fast Germany can strike. Warsaw must fall quickly." No hesitation. His generals nodded. Orders were sent. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was to accelerate. Outside, Berliners cheered as radio announcements spoke of great victories in Poland. But in private, the Führer's advisors sensed something uneasy. Hitler's overconfidence, his refusal to consider diplomacy, was pushing Germany toward an all-afternoon. The British ambassador, Sir Neville Henderson, waited for a response from the German government. None came. At 3 p.m., Henderson requested an urgent audience with Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. Ribbentrop was cold, dismissive. He insisted that Poland had provoked the conflict, and that Germany was merely defending itself. When the ambassador asked whether Germany would withdraw its troops, Ribbentrop smiled and said, "That question no longer has meaning." The meeting ended in silence. The message to London was clear: Hitler would not back down. As evening fell, Hitler returned to his private study. He pored over the maps again, tracing the red arrows that marked his army's advance. For him, this was vindication, proof that his vision of lightning war worked. He believed destiny was on his side. His staff recalled that he was almost cheerful that night. He joked, even laughed as he listened to reports from his field commanders. But the truth was far darker. In his arrogance, Hitler was blind to the storm that was about to break upon him. While Hitler slept confidently in his Berlin office, the world was already moving toward total war. In London, Churchill, not yet Prime Minister, warned Parliament. "This is no local conflict. This is the beginning of something greater, something darker." In Washington, D.C., President Franklin Roosevelt called for peace, but knew that the world was entering chaos. And in Moscow, Stalin watched quietly, smiling, bound by the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which divided Poland between the two dictatorships. Europe was standing on the edge of fire. Across Germany, people listened to their radios that night. The voice of Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, filled the air. "Our forces are achieving total victory. The Führer's leadership is unmatched. Germany is defending its honor." But not everyone believed. Some Germans feared what was coming. They had lived through the Great War only 20 years earlier. They knew what total victory usually meant. Total destruction. Yet none could speak. The Nazi police state was everywhere. Late that night, Hitler's generals gathered one last time in the Situation Room. Radio operators confirmed that British and French communications had gone silent. No more warnings. No more negotiations. Keitel approached Hitler and asked, "My Führer, what if Britain and France declare war tomorrow?" Hitler looked up from his desk, expressionless. "Then they will share Poland's fate," he said. "Germany will crush them all." But deep inside, even his most loyal officers could feel the tension. The Führer's confidence was terrifying, not because he might lose, but because he truly believed he could not. As midnight approached, the lights of Berlin dimmed. Air raid sirens were being installed. People whispered about a new world war. Hitler stood at the window of his office, staring into the dark city. He believed the future belonged to him. Below, soldiers marched through the streets, their boots echoing against the cobblestones. War banners waved. The machine of conquest was in motion. Soft background hum, distant thunder rolling. As the night of September 2nd fell, Europe held its breath. The invasion of Poland had entered its second day. Cities were burning, roads jammed with refugees, and the sound of German aircraft echoed across the sky. In Warsaw, people prayed in darkened basements, the glow of fires painting the horizon red. The Polish army fought desperately, outnumbered but not broken. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler sat in his office, his confidence unshaken. He believed victory was already his. To him, Poland was just the first step, a warm-up for a greater conquest to come. But outside Germany's borders, the world was no longer silent. The storm he had unleashed was spreading. Early morning, September 3rd, 1939. In London, the city was quiet, too quiet. People gathered around radios, waiting for their government's decision. At 9 a.m., the broadcast began. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's voice trembled as he spoke. "I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany." In that moment, Britain entered the war. A new chapter of history had begun. Across the Channel, France followed within hours. The Western powers had finally drawn the line. Back in Berlin, the news reached Hitler's office. Witnesses said he went pale, silent, his hands trembling as he read the telegram. For a brief second, the man who had defied the world was stunned. The day that followed changed everything. German propaganda tried to spin the news. They called it a defensive war, a war forced upon them by British aggression. But deep inside the German high command, officers knew the truth. Hitler had crossed the point of no return. Factories began producing weapons day and night. Posters flooded the streets. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one leader. Yet even as Hitler promised victory, the seeds of his downfall had been planted. In the east, the Red Army watched carefully. In the west, the British Empire prepared its armies. And across the Atlantic, the United States began to awaken from isolation. The war that Hitler started was now beyond his control. Soft ambient hum, faint echoes of marching boots. September 4th, 1939. The world was no longer the same. Britain and France had declared war, and their empires, stretching from Africa to Asia, now prepared for battle. Across the globe, telegrams flashed between colonies. Orders were issued, ships were readied. In the North Sea, the British Royal Navy began its blockade. German merchant ships vanished from the oceans. Inside Berlin, the mood changed. For the first time, Hitler realized this war would not end quickly. Still, he refused to show fear. In meetings, he smiled, telling his generals that Germany would crush both the West and the East, before they even understood what had happened. But behind the walls of the Reich Chancellery, his inner circle whispered quietly. They knew what was coming. A long, brutal war Germany might not survive. In London, air raid sirens tested for the first time since the Great War. Children were evacuated from cities, gas masks distributed to millions. Winston Churchill, still First Lord of the Admiralty, sent his famous message to every ship in the Royal Navy. Winston is back. It was both a warning and a promise. The same man who had predicted Hitler's rise was now preparing to lead the fight against him. British bombers took to the skies for their first mission, not to attack cities, but to drop leaflets over Germany, urging the people to resist Hitler's tyranny. It was a war of nerves, a quiet beginning to a storm that would soon grow deafening. In Berlin, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels flooded the airwaves with speeches of victory and destiny. But ordinary Germans felt something different. They saw the faces of young men leaving for the front, and they remembered 191. 4. Mothers cried silently as trains departed. Fathers watched, wordless, knowing what war truly meant. Inside the Wehrmacht High Command, General Halder began keeping a secret diary. He wrote of his doubts, his fears that Hitler's plans would lead Germany to destruction. The myth of invincibility, the illusion that Hitler could do no wrong, had begun to crack. Far to the east, Soviet forces began moving toward Poland's border. Under the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Hitler and Stalin had agreed to carve Poland in two. For now, the world did not know. But soon Soviet troops would cross the line, and the Polish nation, trapped between two monsters, would be erased from the map. In London and Paris, leaders debated how to help Poland, but their armies were slow, unprepared, and hesitant to act. This inaction would haunt them. As Hitler's armies pushed deeper, he stood before his generals and declared, "No power on earth can stop Germany now." Yet history would prove otherwise. Oh, orchestral music rises, slow, heavy, haunting. By the end of the first week of war, Europe was on fire, from the skies of Poland to the harbors of the North Sea. The drums of war echoed endlessly. Hitler had set the world ablaze, and now even he could not control the flames. The war he had dreamed of as a quick victory was transforming into something far greater, a global catastrophe that would consume everything. Millions would fight, millions would fall, and the dream of a 1,000-year Reich would begin to crumble before it even truly began. Music swells, deep and tragic. The calm was gone, the storm was raging, and humanity was standing at the edge of its darkest chapter. Fade to black. On-screen text. World War II, the fire spreads. Next episode, the fall of Poland.